Welcome to my gathering basket. My name is Danelle. Thank you for joining me today. Today is a little bit different episode. If you recall, the last time I spoke with you, which I'm sorry has been about a month ago now, I told you I had some travel coming up and there might be yarn included. And there was. I have been back now for 2 weeks almost from a trip to Scotland, and more specifically to the Shetland Wool Week. The best way to summarize all of that? Magic. It was an amazing trip. I so hope that I wasn't right when I said this is a once-in-a-lifetime trip. It was the most amazing, unexpected, didn't really know what to expect going into it, which was fantastic because I could just enjoy every minute of it. So let me back up. Why did I go to Scotland? Well, my parents had a favorite author, George MacDonald, who was writing in the mid-1800s, Scottish pastor, and he was also a novelist and wrote stories about mostly the Highlands of Scotland. They were current for his day, so for us, they're historical fiction. And very much painted a romanticized version of the Highlands and life in Scotland. And I knew this. But ever since then, my parents and I have talked about going to Scotland and seeing the Highlands. We've literally been talking about this for decades. So finally, we decided it was time. If we were going to do it, we needed to stop talking about it. So my mom is not a traveler. She decided to stay home, but my dad loves to travel. So I asked if he would accompany me and go explore Scotland. We decided we would stay in Edinburgh for 10 days and just explore that rather than wearing ourselves out trying to see the entire country. We would just kind of base ourselves there, rent a flat, and go for day trips, that kind of thing. Well, then I have been following along with the Shetland Wool Week for the 10 years that they have been having that festival. I had friends that went to the very first one and came back glowing, but they loved Scotland, so I didn't think too much about it. Just sounded like a wonderful trip, but something I would never get a chance to do. But I've been following them ever since. And when Dad picked the dates, I told him to pick the dates because he had a few more commitments this fall than I did. And when he got back to me with his proposal of the dates, and I looked at my schedule and I was able to get the time off work. And then I was doing some looking around one day and realized that the dates we were going to be in Scotland were exactly the dates of the Shetland Wool Week. So I went to Dad and said, "Hey Dad, I have a problem. I cannot go 200 and some miles from the Shetland Wool Week and not go." So originally, I thought I would just leave him in Edinburgh doing some things that he wanted to do, and then I would take the trip up to Shetland and, just for an overnight or just for a day. Really wasn't sure what I was talking about. And then the more he got to looking at it, and I told him why I wanted to go to Shetland, he started doing some research. I started doing some research. When all was said and done, to be honest, we both wished we had just spent all 10 days in Shetland instead of coming back to Edinburgh. Not that Edinburgh wasn't fun. It's a beautiful city. I saw a lot of really neat historical places, which is what we wanted to see. But definitely more interested in the history. Got to see some gardens that were beautiful, and of course, I love gardening. So that was, and we did get to take a day trip. Just took a bus up into the Highlands and just to see the scenery. It was beautiful. It was everything I had pictured in my mind. So nothing against that, but the magical part of the entire trip was our time in Shetland. Now, if you don't know, and many of my friends had never heard of Shetland before, so I found myself explaining it, and basically it's at the same latitude, I believe, as Anchorage, Alaska. So it's way north. It's 216 miles or something through, basically it's the North Sea, up above Scotland. So to get there was an adventure. So we left my house at 4 o'clock in the morning, drove to our regional airport an hour away, and we're headed to Chicago, from Joplin, Missouri to Chicago to Philadelphia to Edinburgh, and then to Aberdeen and up to Shetland. That was our plan. The first thing that happened was 5 o'clock in the morning. They tell us that they are overbooked on this flight and they're asking for volunteers to step aside and take a different flight. Long story there, but we found ourselves on our way to Dallas, then to Philadelphia. And when we got to Philadelphia and we were getting ready to leave, we had like an 8-hour layover. And it still makes me laugh. Just before we started to board our flight to Edinburgh overnight, it was about 9 o'clock at night, and my dad turned on his phone, which was on airplane mode, to call my mom and say, hey, we're getting ready to take off, and we're doing fine, whatever. And he got this whole string of messages. Apparently, Chicago was locked into huge storms, and all flights out of Chicago had been canceled. So had we not been rerouted through Dallas, we wouldn't have made the trip to begin with. So we were very, very thankful. That was just kind of a God blessing for us to start out our journey. So that was fun, and we marveled at that the whole time. So we got to Edinburgh, overnight flight, and hopped on the city tram to go across town to Haymarket, to grab a train to go up to about a 2.5-hour drive or ride on the train up to Aberdeen, got on a ferry at Aberdeen and went to first Orkney, which is another set of islands, and then up to Lerwick, Shetland. 14.5 hours on the ferry. By the time we stepped up, we were kind of swaying. It took us a couple days. By the time we got back on the ferry to come back, we were just barely starting to get our land legs. And then we took a 12-hour ferry back to Aberdeen and then back to Edinburgh for a few days. It was quite a trip. From the time we left my house to arriving in Lerwick Harbor was 47 hours. It was a very nice, can't complain about the trip at all, but it was 47 hours. So you really have to want to go to Shetland. There is one airline, just a regional airline, Logan Air, that does fly from, I believe it's from Aberdeen to Sumburgh Head, which is the very southern tip of Shetland. We wanted to take the ferry. It's, for one thing, it's much cheaper. We were going to have to stay at a hotel anyway, so whether we stayed on the ferry overnight or it was almost a wash as far as cost went. So it was like we paid for a night at a hotel and got the transportation for free. The food was wonderful. The people were great on the ferry, but it's still a boat. But the ferry services and just sea life in general is so much a part of the Shetland Islands that to miss out on that, we just felt like that was part of the experience we wanted. And there's always the thing of air travel. A lot of times it's a little bit spotty because of weather. They can't always guarantee that the flight will get there, and it is over the North Sea and it can be pretty rocky. And I'm not a big fan of flying. So all things considered, we decided to take the ferry, and I'm glad we did. But 47 hours of traveling, we landed in Lerwick Harbor and walked about 1.5 miles or so to our hotel, and they were able to get us into our rooms early, which was wonderful because this was like 9:30 in the morning. And so we got to take a shower at the hotel. Now this is a very old hotel, and they were very nice to us there. But it was definitely there was a reason that it was the only thing that was open for availability during Shetland Wool Week. Pretty much, if you don't have it's a little bit like Rhinebeck. If you don't have your arrangements made a year in advance, like people have already made their arrangements for next year, you may or may not get a place to stay. Unlike Rhinebeck, it's not like you can stay 2 hours away and just drive in because we are on an island. But being on an island I think that was part of what made the trip so special, because it's a very defined area. You can't just come and go overnight, or people come and they stay. There was just a community feeling to the whole area, and probably part of that was being a visitor. But we kept hearing from people how hospitality in Shetland is so amazing, and the people are what make the experience. And I totally agree. Now, Shetland Wool Week they estimate about 1,000 people came to Wool Week. The difference with Wool Week, it's not necessarily shopping focused. There is a big market on the Saturday, and I wasn't there long enough. We came on a Sunday morning. We arrived on the ferry Sunday morning, and then we actually left Tuesday evening. So very, very short time. And there was a big makers market on Saturday, and I wasn't able to attend that. But even so, it wasn't the push and shove, crammed in type of market from the pictures that I saw that you see at some festivals. So even that just seemed charming. But for the part that I was there, it's more classes. They had 400 events spread out over about 10 days. And those events are knitting classes, weaving classes, spinning classes, dyeing classes, fusible glass, all of just about anything you can imagine in traditional handcrafts. Those classes, and then a lot of tours. As I said, Shetland is composed of many islands. I'm not even sure how many. Many of them are uninhabited, but the ones that do have communities on them, almost every island opened up and had something going on. So there were tours to the island of Fair Isle. There were tours to a croft on Bresse, which is basically a sheep farm, working sheep farm. There were tours to the farthest, and they were long tours, to get to the farthest isle of Unst, way up north. And little things going on at community centers, music events, showings of classic movies about Shetland. There was a fleece judging that apparently was really neat to go see. So tours of the mills, just all sorts of, you name it, teas and dinners and meetups, and it was quite an event. Unfortunately, we didn't make our plans. All in all, our trip was very spur of the moment almost. I think we planned it for maybe 10 weeks or something like that. So tickets were gone for just about everything. But what I had been told was show up and then just enjoy Shetland and you'll get to see Wool Week. And that was totally true. I was told that people often would sell off their tickets if they weren't able to use them. And I was able to get a class with Elizabeth Johnson in lace knitting. So I was able to do that Tuesday right before we left. But other than that, I basically just went to the wool shops, walked around town. Sunday morning, we found a church to go to, and I knew that we were going to be arriving on a Sunday morning, and Dad and I both wanted to go to a church service there. So I did a little bit of research and came across Lerwick Baptist Church and was able to listen to some of their sermons online for the last 2 months. So kind of had a feel for the congregation before I came, and it was probably a little weird because I found myself recognizing people and being able to put a face with a name that I had heard during the services. So that was a lot of fun, and really that was what made our trip. The people there were so welcoming, so nice. We showed up at church. We were going to walk, and it was farther than we realized. And so we ended up taking a taxi to the church that morning, and we almost immediately had offers for a ride back to the hotel. And the gentleman that took us back actually was a tour guide. And so he took us the long way back to town and gave us like a little mini tour. And then the next day we had met another lady at church, Ruth, from Scenic Shetland, and she offered to take us on a tour. She had a cancellation Monday, and that was really the only day we had to really go around and see things. But we didn't want to drive. We didn't want to rent a car for a day. And there's basically one highway that's 2-lane, and the rest are one-way or single lane roads. And they're very much up and down. Everything was up and down. And we didn't want to start start trying to drive around by ourselves, not having enough time, trying to learn the lay of the land and where things were, and driving on the other side of the road and all that. So we were just going to take buses and kind of make up our own tours. But Ruth had a cancellation. And so she was willing to kind of tailor a little tour for us for an afternoon. We were so tired at that point. She was going to take us on a full day tour, and we said, would you be willing to do just a half a day? And she did. And she tailored things to our interests. Dad and I had read a story called The Shetland Bus that is a kind of a memoir of the British officer that was in charge of, or one of them in charge of, the Shetland bus operation, which is an amazing story of how the people of Shetland and the people of Norway and the British kind of teamed together to ferry, to supply, to rescue people with the resistance movement in Norway during World War II. Long story, fascinating story. And that was one of the things that when Dad was looking at coming with me, and he started reading up and saw that story. And when he read that story, he said, I've got to go see this too. And there's a museum not too far from Lerwick in the old capital. So that was one thing he really wanted to see. So Ruth knew that I was interested in knitting. She knew that my dad is a pastor, and we were both very interested in church history and then history in general, and specifically wanted to see Scalloway and the Shetland bus story. So she tailored an amazing 4 hours to exactly what we wanted to see. Took me around, showed me farms, pointed out the sheep. We talked about the different sheep breeds that were around in Shetland. She was so knowledgeable. And then she was also able to take us around, and as we were going to Scalloway to see the museum, showed us a lot of the old churches and the history behind the different churches and the people that were involved in that community. So it was such a fun day and really made Shetland come alive. If you offered me a job on Shetland, I would probably be moving in 2 weeks. It was an amazing time. It was one of those times where you go someplace and it almost immediately feels like home. Now, I realize if I moved there, it would be a whole different story and would take adjusting. It is a different country. But the people were wonderful. At one point, we were trying to take a bus somewhere, and we couldn't quite find where the bus stop was. We didn't see the sign where we thought it was. So I stopped an older gentleman that was walking down the sidewalk, and there's sidewalks everywhere, so you could walk everywhere. That was so nice, coming from a town with no sidewalks. So we could walk and really enjoyed walking around and just seeing things. The architecture is fun. The harbors are fun. It's just beautiful. But this gentleman asked where we were going, and we said we're trying to get up to the ferry terminal to leave our things and then come back into town to do some shopping before we leave. And he said, well, I'm not really sure where that bus stops exactly here. It's somewhere here, but I'm not sure. But I'm headed that direction. He actually had just dropped his wife off at a class for Wool Week and was just kind of bumming around town for the afternoon for the morning until time to pick her up. So he took us up to the ferry and then said, if you guys just want to take your luggage, I'll take you back into town wherever you need to go. He was so nice. And at that point, we had been walking for 2 days around Shetland, and everything is up and down. And like I said, we were in a very old hotel. There was no way to put an elevator in it. And it was 72 steps up to my room. By the time you do that a couple times a day and then go up and down hills, we were tired. So we felt very, very blessed to get a ride like that. And we just kept bumping into people that we saw at church Sunday morning, and then we would meet them on the sidewalk in downtown Lerwick, and they recognized us, and it was so nice. The people were just made it for us. So that was that. And then there's 3 wool shops in Lerwick. And Lerwick's not very big, but you've probably heard of Jamieson and Smith, and then there's Jamieson of Shetland, and then there was another, just a craft. It was called Loose Ends, and it was every kind of craft. They had just little bits of everything. Sewing, quilting, knitting. I think they had some painting supplies and some dyeing supplies and just some cross stitch, just a little bit of everything. It was almost like a general store for crafters. Little tiny shop. But they had the Dale yarns supplied there. And Dale is a small sheep farm. Actually, it's not that small. Towards Scalloway, that produces all organic fibers. And I believe they have their own mill there, just a very small mill, kind of like the mini mill. And they do their own processing so that they can certify as organic. So I was very intrigued by them. And then, of course, the two, Jameson and Smith and Jameson of Shetland. And there's probably, I know that there are more little farm yarns around Shetland, but those were the three I thought I would focus on. Because again, I was only there for basically on Sunday. Shetland, Lerwick shuts down. There was no bus service. There were very few places to eat. The stores were not open. It was really nice to be in an area that kind of shuts down for a little bit. But it did make it a little challenging to get around. So we had Sunday was a little bit more relaxed. And then Monday, I just kind of went around. I did make the trek up the big hill to Jameson and Smith, kind of to try to get myself awake before we took our tour with Ruth, and just looked around, kind of putting together my wish list for the next day when I was going to be taking a class there. The class that I took actually was held at the wool brokers, Jameson and Smith's factory, where they do all their wool sorting and grading. So took a hike up there and looked around for a little bit, and then came back down and went for our tour with Ruth. And then pretty much we didn't do a whole lot Monday night. There were several places that were open late. The Jameson of Shetland store was open. They have a small store in Lerwick, and then their main mill and factory, their bigger store, is across the island at Sandness. And someday I would love to go take a tour over there, but I didn't have time to take the bus trip over that direction. So I went to their little store in town and looked around. They were open late on Monday, and went to Loose Ends and looked around there. And then Tuesday, we had a little bit of time in the morning. There is the Lerwick Museum, or the Shetland Museum is in Lerwick, and that's where they had what they called the hub. It was kind of the social center. It was where the meetups were happening. They had local musicians playing, lots of couches and tables and chairs for people just to sit down and knit. The MRI makers, which is, and if it makes sense now why I was doing the roadside beanie, which was kind of the official hat pattern for Shetland Wool Week. So this was my dad's, and then I made the Harriet's hat. And this was done, and I think I've told you the story before in podcasts, but if this is your first time with me, the Harriet's hat is a pattern that's raising money to go to the MRI Scanning Equipment Fund. There's a fundraiser by MRI Shetland, and basically people have gotten together and they're trying to raise the funds to get an MRI machine at their hospital there in Lerwick. Currently, they would have to take the plane or the ferry over to the mainland in Scotland and go to, usually, I think most of them said they would have to go all the way to Glasgow to get an MRI. So it's not a simple thing and not a cheap thing either. So they're trying to get equipment right there on Shetland. And this pattern was developed by Harriet Middleton, and she was making the hats and selling them to raise money. And then somebody got the brilliant idea of selling the patterns to knitters that wanted to make it. And they have raised, the last I heard, I think yesterday I heard that the knitting community, through these and other fundraisers in the knitting community, there were several fundraisers at Shetland Wool Week, but they've raised over $60,000 just from the knitting community. And there's all sorts of things going on to continue raising money. And basically what people had started saying is, hey, Shetland has done so much for the knitting community. All of the amazing designers, the knitting traditions that come out of Shetland, and then just hosting this amazing event. It didn't cost a penny for me to go to Wool Week. Now, if I wanted to do the classes, some of those, they ranged, most of them 10 to 50 pounds for a class, which is so much cheaper than just about any festival I've done in the US. So the classes are relatively inexpensive. The events, many of them are free. And a lot of people like me never really registered with Wool Week. I just showed up and went to the yarn shops and went to the hub and talked to other knitters from around the world. And oh my goodness, was it international. The class that I took in lace knitting, there were only 15, I believe, in the class. There were 7 nationalities represented. So basically there weren't more than 2 people from any one country. When you went in the hub, you heard so many different languages being spoken. It was so cool, but we all had knitting in common. So it was basically free for me to go to. It wasn't like I had to pay a registration fee to show up at Wool Week. I just got to go and experience the atmosphere, basically. So I went to the hub several times, and of course the yarn shops had some specials going. They had book signings going on, things like that. But basically, I would love to go back for Wool Week again and be able to do more activities. But honestly, if I get a chance to go back, I think I want to go back in the summer, like June or so, when the temperatures are a little bit more what I'm used to. It was a little chilly, not bad, but it was chilly. It did not rain on us. It sprinkled once, but other than that, it didn't rain, and rain had been forecasted the whole week. So I was very thankful for decent weather, but it was chilly. And did I mention that I stayed in an old hotel? My heat didn't work. So I was a little chilly, and my dad did end up catching a cold while we were there. But it could have been much worse. But it would be so nice to go back. Ruth, that I was telling you about, that I took the tour with, does a sheep croft tour. And we were talking about that and different places I would love to go. And she said, oh, I've been talking to so-and-so about getting permission to go to their place for a tour. And I've talked to Jameson of Shetland about doing tours out there. And so I'm hoping to get all of that set up. And so I hope I can go back and do that. I would love to go back again. So I did do some shopping. Like I said, we decided to do all carry-on luggage, and we made it. But it got a little bit interesting because, well, thank goodness for space bags, because I did buy more than I intended, which I knew would happen, hence taking the space bags. But one thing that is very distinctive Shetland is the knitting belt. And before I even went, I told myself I was not going to buy a knitting belt. But I've told myself things before, and you know how that's gone. So I did go ahead and buy a knitting belt. And I was talking to some ladies at the Loose Ends shop, and you saw these knitting belts all over. Every store had them. Even the tourist information center that had a little gift shop there, they had knitting belts. So basically I think they were all made by the same person. They looked very much alike. So you just basically had to pick your color. But I got to talking, so I did buy one. This is a knitting belt. And if you haven't seen these used, they're the gentleman that made this anyway, according to the people that I talked to at the shop, they said he comes around and supplies all the stores. And what he does is he finds antique furniture, leather furniture, that's horsehair stuffed. You know, the old chairs and sofas, love seats, would have horsehair in the cushions. So he takes old furniture that can't be restored, takes the leather off, and he uses the leather to make the outside, and then he uses the old horsehair stuffing to stuff the inside. So it's very flexible. I mean, it's leather, it's stiff leather, but as you wear it, and it has a long strap that you wear around your waist, but as you wear it and use it, it will actually form to you, and you'll have your own contoured, just like a good pair of shoes would, as it breaks in. But in order to knit with a knitting belt, you use long DPNs like this. These are 30 centimeter, and the only sizes that they had in this brand were a 2.5 millimeter and a 3 millimeter. So I bought two. I want to say they had some bigger ones, but these were the other stores all had, I think they were pretty much Addies, and they were a little bit pricey. This was a brand, Millward, that I had never heard of before, but they were a little less expensive per set, and not being sure that I could actually learn how to use a knitting belt, I kind of didn't want to make the huge investment. So I bought 2 pairs, and I got the shorter. Most of the women said they used a 40 centimeters, so another 4 inches. Big long things. But they looked at me and they actually gave me, so I went to Loose Ends and I started talking. There were a bunch of ladies that came in that were teaching classes there through the week. And so I had told one of the ladies that had moved there from Arizona many years ago. And then these other ladies had moved there from England several, like 2 years ago or so. And all 3 of them, so none of them were native Shetlanders, and all of them had converted to using a knitting belt and swore they'd never do anything else. They said it was so, once they learned it, it was so much more ergonomic. They could knit faster. Their tension was more even. So at that point they had me, and they actually gave me a knitting belt, and they brought out their knitting needles and some, because when I said I don't know if I need the longer or shorter, like this big funny argument broke out, and no, I always use longer or best, no, shorter or best, longer or best, no, you have to do it this way. So there's as many styles of ways and techniques to knit with a knitting belt than as anything else. But I got these. The funny part was I had figured I would buy too much to take in my suitcases, so I would probably have to mail a bunch of stuff back. So that was my intention when I got these. Well, when we got back to Edinburgh and we were kind of sorting things out and reorganizing for our time there, I thought, I can get all this in my suitcase. I think with the space bags, I think I'll be all right. Didn't even think about getting these through the airport in my carry-on luggage. Oh my goodness, I about had a heart attack when we got to the airport, and I went, oh my word, are these going to be confiscated? Do I need to send these back? Am I going to be searched? And everything was fine. I actually talked to one of the security guards in the Edinburgh airport, and I said, I'm really worried about these, before I even got to the security, like our TSA. We were just checking in and getting our tickets. And I said, I have these, and I don't want it to look like I'm trying to sneak something through. What is your advice? Is it gonna, yes, no, maybe so? And he kind of said, it just depends on who's at the desk. Sometimes they go through and sometimes they don't. But he never even blinked at what they were. So, sign of a good country. But you work with these long double points. This feels like an unboxing. I haven't even opened these up. But basically, you use these to support your knitting needle, and then you're knitting off of, and they use 3. So you're knitting in the round, your actual stitches are going to be on 2 needles, and you're working with onto a 3rd, I think. That seems to be what it looks like anyway. So you're only using 3 needles instead of what I would be normally used to using 4. And then you're supporting it here. So what they say is you're actually not really holding on to this needle. You're just working around it. And I say all this because obviously I've just opened up my knitting needles, so I have not tried it. And I am determined to try it. Whether or not I convert to this is my major way of knitting, we'll see. The one thing I thought of was, it's not something I can stick in my purse the way I can like DPNs or, for a sock. They were knitting everything on these: hats, socks, mittens, shawls, everything. But I'm not sure that for my lifestyle it's going to be quite as portable. When these were first starting to be used, the story goes that because knitwear was such it was an economic thing for them. I mean, that was the women would knit for pay. They would knit sweaters and sell them to a broker who would sell them abroad. They needed to knit fast. And some of the fastest knitters, in fact, the fastest knitter, Hazel Tyndall, is Shetland based. So it is a very efficient, fast way. And what they were saying is because you had this place to rest your needles here, so if you're not working with it, you can just put all your needles here as a holder, and they would actually have it at their waist, and when they weren't knitting, they just flip it around to the back and do whatever they needed to do, and then as quick as they had their hands free, they could flip the belt back and continue right where they were. And you know, that sounds like a knitting legend, but just talking to the ladies there, they said, yeah, that's what my mom or my grandmother or my aunt, or you know, that's what I do now. So it's an intriguing method of knitting to me, and I am definitely going to give it a try. I will report back later when I've had a chance to really work with it. But that was interesting trying to get that through it caused me more problems than it did, or mentally. I wasn't sure how I was dreading the whole day. Every time we get to a different airport, are my needles going to make it through? Are my needles going to make it through? And they did just fine. Yarn wise, I had worked with Jamieson and Smith yarn. That's what came in my kit to make this. So I definitely wanted to go to Jamieson of Shetland, and I hope I keep those straight correctly. And I wanted to go to Jamieson of Shetland and try some of their yarn. Jamieson of Shetland works with just purebred, my understanding, if I've read it correctly, they work with only purebred Shetland sheep. They do the entire process at their mill. They're in Sandnes on Shetland. They don't send anything out. So it's all a Shetland product. Jamieson and Smith do work with some crossbreed wool. It's all from Shetland, but they do send it, they do all the sorting, and Oliver Henry is their chief grader, and everything I've heard, I did see him around. He was the patron, kind of the keynote for this year's event. He was one of the ones that started Shetland Wool Week 10 years ago. So because it was the anniversary, they made him what they call the patron. And it was his idea that inspired the roadside beanie, and he gave several presentations and a lot of guided tours through their mill, their wool warehouse, or the wool broker they call it. So they do a lot of it there, but they actually have the actual spinning done outside of Shetland. Both yarns are wonderful. I have now worked with, and where did I put it? I have now done some knitting with Jamieson of Shetland. I was able to go to the MRI Makers booth at the Hub, kind of the social knitting center. They had a display set up, and I was able to meet Harriet Middleton and talk with her for a while. I tried really hard to get a selfie. That lady never sits still long enough. In fact, I have a couple pictures of her, and they're blurry because she was just running back and forth. But she was having so much fun talking to people. You could tell she was just, yeah, she was really fun. But I was able to get a hard copy of the hat. And then she'd also put out, I'm sorry about the glare, a mitten pattern. She has a fingerless mitts pattern, and she's working on a cowl pattern, kind of all in the same theme, the same motif. And she'd also put out, and I don't think I brought it over, but she'd put out another pattern for a headband. So I thought that would be a good, I could find some colors at Jamieson of Shetland and just try out the pattern. So I picked my own colors. And there we go. So I knit this on the plane coming back from Scotland, and this is actually double-sided. It's reversible. So I knit that after I got home. So I have the headband, finished. I didn't do the best job picking out the colors. I like the colors a lot, but I probably needed a little bit more contrast. You can just barely see. And then definitely on the inside, there's just not enough contrast. I did it several times trying to rearrange and get a little bit more contrast. I thought when I did this contrast band that my colors are going to be distinct enough that they would show here, and it wasn't as good. There is a definite art to picking colors for color work, but it's still going to be warm and cozy. We are just starting to get cold here. The funny part was we thought we were so cold in Scotland. And actually the funny part was when we got to our flat in Edinburgh, we couldn't get the heat working there either. So we were really cold. And it was in the mid 40s there for the most part. And we kept saying, oh, when we get home, it'll be in the 80s. We were still having 90s when we left. So it'll be so nice to get warm. And we had our first cold front come through the day before we landed back home. And it was actually the same exact temperature when we landed as it was when we left Edinburgh. So, and then 2 days later, we had our first hard freeze of the year, which is incredibly early for our part of the country. But so I will be wearing this probably before too long. But that was my knitting project. That is just about all the knitting that I got done while I was gone. You always have these grand plans of all the knitting you're going to get done on a vacation. And well, I know I'm not the only one that doesn't get done what they think they're going to. But that was my Jameson of Shetland. Very nice wool. This is the 2-ply fingering weight. I forget what they call it. I did buy, this was kind of one of my frivolous purchases. I got a project bag with the 10th anniversary logo on it. And this is what I have left of my skeins. Most of these yarns are sold in 25-gram balls. So this is one I haven't used. And I will say that, there you go. To me, my very brief experience, the Jameson's Spindrift, I'm sorry, that's what they call their fingering weight. The Jameson Spindrift is maybe just a little bit stickier than the Jameson and Smith that I had worked for before. It worked really well for color work. I love the way it blocked out. The tension problems you see are all mine. This actually was a little bit tight on me, so I stretched it and blocked it out a little bit aggressively, so that didn't help my tension. But if I had to rip it back, it didn't enjoy being ripped very much. It never broke, but it was it's just a little bit fuzzier. And maybe that's the colorways that I used. I don't know, but it did seem to be just a little bit stickier, which is a great thing for color work. But that was about the only difference. They're very, very similar yarns. So I actually got the yarn and finished a project that I bought it at Wool Week. So there was that. And then of course I had my class that was held at Jameson and Smith. So I was going to buy just a couple skeins. I've been wanting to make Kate Davies' sheep heat hat. And the story I heard, I don't know if this is true or not, but there have been 6 of the Shetland Wool Week hats, the actual like official patterns. And if they'd had a 7th, this would have been the first one. They said that I believe Kate was the patron that year, and she designed this to be released. It's all the different natural colors of Shetland wool. And so she designed that for that year. And then that took off so well that the next year they decided to ask the patron that year to design a hat, and the tradition just continued. And the fun part was, I really didn't think I would enjoy I'm not a big hat wearer anyway, and a beanie style, and my dad doesn't wear hats, and I really didn't have that much interest in doing the roadside beanie. But I went ahead and did it anyway once I figured out that we were going to be there. I really wanted to make this, but I thought I'll just go ahead and wait and get the Shetland wool when I get there to make this. Well, I was able to get the hard pattern, but like I said, I think it's 12 skeins of yarn, and that was a lot of yarn to carry back. So I thought I just need to do something that I can just get a couple skeins, a small project, and be able to carry it back. Meanwhile, and I have stuff spread out all over here, but there is a tunic, here it is, a tunic pattern that I have wanted to make since I saw somebody wearing it. Actually, it was Sarah Pomegranate was wearing this tunic when I went to Rhinebeck in 2016, and it's called the Bresse dress. So it's a tunic length short dress, and when I saw her wearing it, I don't remember the colors she had, but it was so cute. And Bresse is the name of the island that's right across the harbor from Lerwick. So it's literally a 5-minute ferry trip. My dad did it while I was taking the class. This is, when I came back from Rhinebeck, I bought this book, Mary Jane Mucklestone, Fair Isle Style. So I bought that book specifically to have this dress pattern. But I haven't really decided what kind of wool I wanted to make it with, what colors. And it has a very cute yoke, but I wasn't so keen on the geometric look there. Something, it just wasn't quite my style. So I've been hemming and hawing, but this dress just keeps coming back. And having seen the island of Bressay now, and they had this book at Jamieson and Smith, so it reminded me of it. And I thought, maybe I could, so I did some quick figuring. I thought maybe I could go ahead and get the yarn. It wasn't going to take that many more skeins to make that whole tunic as to make that hat. So I did some looking around and came up with this denim-y color, and everything is just a number on their colors, but came up with this denim-y color, and that's a pretty true color. And then for my yoke pattern, I decided to go with these, and that's blowing out just a little bit, but that rich kind of fuchsia, and I think those will, the pattern itself calls for 3 contrast colors. So I'll have those and this as the main body of the dress. And then, just because I like to make things complex any chance I get, there was a book put out by the Shetland Guild of Spinners, Knitters, Weavers, and Dyers. And this is a couple years ago, and it's a colored graph. Now, a lot of times, for the most part, the Shetland patterns were passed down orally. They weren't written down. And if they were written down, they were just penciled in, black and white. So people didn't really always know what the color palette was that was traditionally used. So somebody came up, and I'll just show you a quick one here. Find one that shows well. So somebody took some of these graphs and colored them in with a colored pencil to represent some of the existing sweaters, jumpers, mittens, hats. So there's this whole book is just full of there's the back cover, so you can see. So here's the graph and the knitting, and there are hundreds of patterns in here. I think some of these are from jumpers that were found in the Shetland Textile Museum. So just a really neat resource. And what I got to thinking, I wasn't going to buy books because they're heavy to have to bring back, but I thought I might be able to look through this and find patterns with the same stitch count that's in that dress, and then come up with some different color options here. Hopefully finding ones that I can redo so there'll only be 3 colors, and maybe some patterns that I like a little bit more, and kind of insert them into that tunic pattern. I have several things that are in the queue way far ahead of that, but I'm hoping sometime this winter maybe I'll be able to actually start on that. I'd really like to. So I brought home patterns. I brought home many ideas. Donna Smith is another Shetland based designer, and she was the one that did the bobble hat several years ago. I knit that, and she had released a new pattern, brand new pattern. I don't know if it's called the Bro Shawl or how that's pronounced, but she had released this, I think, to coincide with Shetland Wool Week. It's actually done in DK weight, and look at the size of that. I think in DK weight, that's just going to be so warm and snuggly. But it's lace, and I can't show you, I don't think it's going to show real, well, maybe, there you go. So it's all lace done in DK. So I think that's going to be beautiful. She was selling the yarn from her farm and had completely sold out before she even got to the market on Saturday. So I think I'm going to put this in my queue for handspun. I have lots of natural colors, a lot of the cream whites. I've got BFL. I have that BFL nylon that I had milled. I've got some more BFL coming. I've got Southdown. I think I do have some Shetland. So I think if I can get the spinning done, that would be beautiful. Wouldn't it be fun to be able to spin and get that knit in time for State Fair next summer? Hashtag goals. I don't see that happening, but I can try. So I got that pattern. I did buy a couple other patterns, and I think they've slipped. Oh, here we go. I thought I would try to, my dad really got into this, and he ended up buying a hat, a flat hat. Or actually, I bought it for him for Christmas, but he wore it the rest of the trip. Did I bring that over? I don't think I did. Nope. But it was from wool spun and woven at Jameson of Shetland, and then they have somebody making flat caps for them, kind of that wool hat. And I said, Dad, would you knit? Would you wear a sweater? And he said, I don't. He's not cold natured like I am. He's usually on the warm side, so he doesn't wear a lot of sweaters. But I said, well, how about a vest like that? So I got that pattern, and I am really looking forward to the challenge of knitting that. But in order, like I said, there is a science to picking colors, and it's so hard when you're doing it on a computer. So the main thing that I got were these swatch cards, so the shade cards. And this is the one from Jamieson and Smith, and the inside, they kept falling out, so I just took them out. But that's what it looks like. So it's just card after card after card of all of their colors. So it'll be so much easier to sit down and kind of, you know, just pull out the colors and see ones that go together well. So that was my one from Jamieson and Smith. And then Jameson of Shetland has the same kind of thing. Theirs is huge. It's beautiful. These are all their natural colors here. And then look at this. I can't even hardly get the whole thing in the screen. They have so many colors, and these are all wound on little cards and glued in. So they're beautiful, maybe a little bit more challenging to kind of place them next to each other, but oh my goodness, I am so glad to have these, because picking out colors online is just, with monitors and then things look different. And yeah, so I am so happy to have both of these and be able to pick from the different ones and maybe do a little bit more intelligently. So that was one thing I really definitely wanted to get while I was there. And I'm hoping to have lots more color work and lace work coming up in the future. And then, of course, like I said, at Loose Ends, somebody had told me that they had the Uredale. There were farm tours to Uredale, and I wasn't able to get into one of those. So I really wanted to see what their yarn was like. So I popped into Loose Ends and got this. And what I'm thinking, we'll see, but what I'm thinking is this may be my first project to try on the knitting belt. So I'm not sure what I'm going to make. I'm probably leaning towards like a hat pattern, something like that. I just have 75 grams. It's very similar yarn to the other two in thickness, in feel. It's Shetland wool, so it has very much the same feel. Nice yarn. I'm looking so forward to trying this, and I'll let you know when I get that on the needles. So that was Uredale. And then, like I said, they also had fabrics. So I did have to get some fabric. Of course, the thistle being one of the symbols of Scotland. So I went ahead and got a couple fat quarters of these cute fabrics. And I'll probably make like a project bag or something like that. So that was the fabric. And oh my goodness, guys, there's so much I could tell you. And I've rambled for far too long already. Trying to think. Oh, and then Ruth, when we were taking our tour, when we finished, she came out, and her mom is a knitter. Her mom doesn't live in Shetland, but she makes these cute animals. And she has a Shetland pony that she gives to all of her tour groups. So this is Miss Luna. She's a hand knit Shetland pony, and I think she is just darling. I don't know for sure if it's made out of, it's probably not Shetland wool. I'm not really sure. It's kind of a tweed look. So, but it is so, I think she's just so cute. She had some of her knitted pieces in one of the gift shops we went to at the Hazik Visitor Center. And probably the one thing that I wish I had purchased, I didn't have room, and that was fine, but she had some knitted puffins. And there was a knitted puffin who was knitting. It was so cute. And her mom knits all of those, and she puts them in different shops. But that was Miss Luna. So she was another one of my souvenirs that came home with me. And she'll live up here for a while. So, oh my goodness, I have rattled on for so long. I have done this episode so many times. And I am not a great photographer. I will put a few shots at the end, but I am not a photographer. I am not the best storyteller. If you want to have a better feel for what Shetland Wool Week is like and the people and the scenery, I just saw that the Fruity Knitting podcast has released their Shetland Wool Week episode, and I'm saving that for a treat. I have watched all they have been there, I believe, 2 other years, and I have watched and rewatched those episodes. They do the most amazing interviews with all of the Shetland knitters. I cannot wait to see which ones they picked out to do this year. So I would highly encourage watching that. The drone photography that they take is always stunning. So definitely look at that. The other one would be, if you're on Instagram, look at the hashtag Shetland Wool Week. The scenery, the pictures, the knitwear, oh my goodness, it is so inspiring and makes me want to go back so badly. So that was my trip. I'm sorry I rambled so long. I will be back to my regular content next episode. If you have any questions, or if you've been there and have comments, memories of it, please put them down below. I would highly, on one hand, and this became a discussion in one of the Facebook groups, I think it was, for Shetland Wool Week, people were talking about how this festival has just exploded and everybody needs to come, and then other people kind of jokingly saying, shh, don't tell anybody, this is too amazing, we don't want it to get so big. And really the limiting factor, and it is going to have to limit at some point, because there just weren't places to stay. You really needed to be able to rent a car if you were going to be there for any length of time, because the events are spread out. They're easy to get to, and people were really good about ride sharing. But it was, it definitely is a challenge to be able to get a car, to get a place to stay. I think half of the island leaves and rents out their homes through Airbnb and other places, which was wonderful, but there's only so many places that you can stay on Shetland. And like I said, it's not the kind of thing that you can just drive in for the day, because it is on an island. So there's kind of that, hey, this needs to grow, it's an awesome, you need to go, you've got to go. And at the same time, if it gets too out of hand, I definitely don't want them to get to the point where they say no more, because it is an amazing experience. If you ever get to go to Shetland, Wool Week or not, go. It's beautiful. So that is my time on Shetland. That is the vacation I had been looking forward to for the last few months. Probably won't be doing a whole lot more traveling till I save up for some more. But boy, if I ever get a chance to go back, I will. So thank you for listening. I hope that there's 1 or 2 of you left at this point in the episode. I have so much more that I want to show you in projects that I've got going, and things that are going on. This is a time of year where things are changing fast on the homestead. So I have a lot more to share with you. So I'll be back in a couple weeks to get back to business as normal. But thank you for listening. I hope you have a wonderful couple weeks, and may your gathering basket overflow with blessings. Thank you. Bye for now.